With the live-action Sonic the Hedgehog film coming out this week, it feels like a good time to look back at the title character's origins. It's hard to talk about the development of Sonic the Hedgehog without mentioning his competition, Mario. The Mario games were system sellers, and the Sega Master System could only do so much. So Sega decided a mascot should be created for the Genesis/Mega Drive outside of the success of arcade games, and set a development team, later named Sonic Team, to work. Speed and a spiky animal who could roll were emphasized, and it was a choice between an armadillo or hedgehog. The hedgehog, originally named Mr. Needlemouse, was chosen and colored dark blue, as well as given white and red shoes, had a sense of coolness and attitude about him. The result was the 1991 game Sonic the Hedgehog. The premise of the game was developed to be very simple. The mad scientist Dr. Eggman, also known as Dr. Ivo Robotnik, is turning animals into robotic badniks while hunting for the 6 Chaos Emeralds, and it's up to Sonic the Hedgehog to stop him in a simple battle of animals versus machinery. The game takes place across 6 levels or zones, each divided into 3 acts. At the end of each zone, you fight Eggman until you confront him at a final zone. You're also given the opportunity to go through secret zones looking for the Chaos Emeralds. It's a simply structured and fast-paced 2D side-scrolling platformer, and it works. This means that there's not necessarily a lot to review here. First of all, the graphics and animation retrospectively show the competition that Nintendo and Mario had to deal with back then. While Mario's looks were limited by the technology of blocks and simple contrasting colours, the 16-bit hardware allowed for Sonic to look more detailed, especially with his facial expressions. How the zones look is not necessarily anything outstanding by today's standards, but the foregrounds and backgrounds look colourful and vibrant. Plus they all look unique, with the tiniest of details thrown in for good measure. The music, however, seems better than the graphics. While hearing the tunes loop over and over again can get tiresome very quickly, the tunes are funky, catchy and well done, and are certainly iconic and a great use of the 16-bit hardware. This also applies to much of the sound effects. The gameplay is similar to that of the Mario games and a great many others. You control Sonic as he moves and jumps around the levels. You have to avoid or get rid of enemies, as well as traverse obstacles, traps and bottomless pits. To avoid dying, Sonic can collect rings. If he bumps into an enemy or trap carelessly, the rings he collected go everywhere, which disappear quickly. So Sonic can survive with at least one ring, otherwise he loses a life. Enemies can be got rid of by using Sonic's supersonic spin attack, executed by jumping or pressing the directional button down while moving to roll. The good thing about all this are the simple controls. All you use is the directional button and one button. The A, B and C buttons on the controller all do one action. It's simple, anyone can understand it. But that doesn't mean the game is easy by any means. The game's difficulty is not on the same level as, say, a Castlevania or Mega Man or Ghosts and Goblins game, which is fine. But the level design and enemy placement in AI and a few other tiny things add up to a degree of unnecessary frustration in place of a fun and interesting challenge. First of all, the level design is generally fine, and it's actually more open than it initially appears, with multiple pathways and secrets, including mostly out-of-reach power-ups that give you shields, temporary invincibility, faster speed, and more rings than usual. Complete with springs, bumpers, and the overall fast pace, it almost feels like a pinball game, possibly deliberately so. The problem is, the level design does tend to go against the concept of speed that was intended for Sonic, and quite possibly the general gameplay in mind. The first zone, the iconic Green Hill Zone, features lots of flat ground, downward slopes, and loop-de-loops that give Sonic plenty of opportunity to go fast when moving in one direction without stopping. The second zone, Marble Zone, is more about pushing blocks, waiting to move past crushing columns and spikes, staying on moving blocks on lava, and above all, careful jumps. Retrospectively, the first game of the Sonic series is more about platforming than rushing at breakneck speeds with little to no idea where you're going or what's in front of you, which is somewhat refreshing. But the game feels more fun when it's faster paced, with the movement-altering water-heavy Labyrinth Zone being the worst offender. Still, the game is full of variety with the 6 zones featured. That may not sound like a lot of levels, but the patience required, as well as some memorization and the precision needed to avoid traps and not be careless around enemies, is something that has to be practiced if you hope to lose as little lives as possible for fear of restarting the entire game after a game over. So Sonic the Hedgehog is, broadly speaking, an arcade game where you have to complete the game from start to finish in one go. No coins required. The enemy placement, not to mention the almost completely obscure bottomless pits, squashing traps, and drowning that render your power-ups useless, do tend to feel more frustrating or even stressful than a fun challenge. One can imagine today the children in 1991 playing this game over and over again, even when we started from Green Hill Zone quite a few times. Also, getting Sonic to stop moving feels slippery, which doesn't help when you're moving fast and an enemy or trap is just barely visible. You can press up or down to move the camera up or down a little. Overall, the game is beatable, and the arcade nature of trying over and over again does make for some replay value. The only truly easy parts of the game are the multiple fights against Eggman and his many technological weapons. It is almost laughable how easily he can be defeated, with one exception. Speaking of replay value, there are of course the Chaos Emeralds. If you get to the end of an act with at least 50 rings, be careful not to lose them, you can go through a giant ring that acts as a warp to a secret zone. These secret zones are rotating mazes with Sonic stuck in his curled up animation. You have to jump off walls of coloured blocks as well as rotating R-switches and bumpers in an effort to find the hidden emerald. But it's very hard to be precise with your movement and jumps here, which can lead to you leaving the stage without an emerald. The potentially psychedelic and dizzying backgrounds and the fact that each sequence zone gets harder doesn't help matters. The emeralds don't mean a lot to the game, and it's not fun to restart the game multiple times just to obtain them. For getting many rings in these stages gives you continues, or being able to start at Sonic's default 3 lives in the current zone / at after a game over. In spite of all this ranting and praising, it is impossible to deny the legacy that was created with Sonic the Hedgehog in 1991. While developed almost purely to compete with Nintendo and Mario, and actually with the 16-bit console wars for a short time, the Blue Hedgehog's adventures stood out, even amongst other games in general. Even though there are frustrating moments that include jumping in a certain way to overcome a looped waterfall and labyrinth zone, practicing to overcome these by using a downward roll at breakneck speed to defend yourself or landing precise jumps make for many a memorable moment, and a mostly decent challenge. Overall, the understandable premise and controls make this good for the non-gamer crowd. You may just have to be prepared for a challenge. The game is not impossible by any means. And even then, how can you not feel exhilarated or your jaw hitting the ground every time Sonic does a loop-de-loop and moves like the blue blur he is? If you're one of those people who, for whatever reason, never played or owned this game, well, this 1991 classic seems to be on almost everything. The quality varies, with the Game Boy Advance port being notoriously bad, but even the 3DS and other systems feature this game, with changes such as the save system and the spin dash from Sonic the Hedgehog 2 onwards, which actually would have been helpful in the first place. Speaking of Sonic 2, well, the success of this game led to many more games and turned Sonic into a popular icon and a huge multimedia franchise. Catch you all Wednesday for Sonic the Hedgehog 2.